3 weeks passed after the destruction of Haven's Reach, and humanity did something that no species in the history of the Galactic Council had ever done before. They went completely silent. Human merchant ships pulled out of every alien port. Trade agreements were frozen. Embassies across dozens of worlds closed their doors, and the staff boarded shuttles and went home without saying a word to anyone. The communication channels that normally carried thousands of human transmissions every hour went dark. It was as if an entire civilization had simply stopped talking. At first, the Council did not worry. Dreth Vano told his allies that the humans were sulking, that they would come crawling back within a week, begging for protection and aid. The Seldrathi fleet commander, Korath Zel, who had personally ordered the attack on Haven's Reach, sent a message to his superiors, saying that the operation had achieved its goal. Humanity had been put in its place. There was nothing more to discuss. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence began to feel different. It was not the silence of a species that had given up. It was the silence of something holding its breath. On Earth and across the 18 colony worlds, the Terran Federation was moving with a speed and focus that would have terrified anyone watching. Chancellor Beckett had given Admiral Lena Payne full authority over military operations, and Payne had wasted no time. Admiral Payne was 61 years old, with white hair cut short and pale blue eyes that never seemed to blink at the wrong moment. She had commanded ships for 35 years, and had fought in border skirmishes that the Council did not even know about. She was not the kind of officer who gave speeches or inspired people with grand words. She was the kind who sat in a quiet room, studied maps for hours, and then gave orders that ended wars. From a hidden staging point, deep inside the Cygnus Veil Nebula, Payne assembled the largest human fleet ever gathered in one place. 3 full battle groups, over 200 warships, pulled together from every corner of Terran space. Some of these ships had been officially listed as decommissioned. Others had never appeared on any public record at all. They carried weapons that the Galactic Council did not know humans had developed. Payne stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Unbroken Resolve, and reviewed reports every morning at exactly 5 o'clock. She ate the same breakfast every day, black coffee and plain toast, and she spoke to her officers in a calm, low voice that never changed, whether she was discussing supply logistics or battle plans. Commander Kyle Hadley, who had been assigned as her tactical liaison, found her both impressive and slightly frightening. She never raises her voice, Hadley told Lieutenant Megan Holt one evening in the officers' mess. Not once. I've seen admirals who shout and throw things when they're angry. Payne just gets quieter. And that's worse. Holt nodded. She was a sharp-featured woman in her early 30s who had a reputation for seeing problems before they happened. Her job was electronic warfare, and she had spent the last 3 weeks building something she called the Curtain, a network of signal disruptors that could be deployed across an entire star system. When activated, the Curtain would cut off all enemy communications in a target area. No distress calls, no orders, no coordination, just silence and confusion. How long until we can deploy? Hadley asked. It's already deployed, Holt said, and took a sip of her coffee. While Payne prepared the main fleet, Captain Scott Brennan and his stealth frigate, the Quiet Reckoning, were already deep inside Seldrathi space. Brennan was 39, lean and quiet, the kind of man who could sit still for 12 hours watching a sensor screen and never lose focus. His ship was small, fast, and designed to be invisible. For 3 weeks, his crew had been mapping every Seldrathi fleet position, every supply depot, every communication relay, and every defensive installation in the region. They moved like ghosts. The Seldrathi had no idea they were there. Brennan's most important passenger was Dr. Alice Trejo, a civilian scientist who had spent her career studying alien shield technology. Trejo was 44, wore her dark hair in a practical braid, and had the kind of mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos. During the reconnaissance mission, she had captured and analyzed Seldrathi shield frequency data, and she had found something remarkable. The Seldrathi shields, which the galaxy considered nearly impenetrable, rotated their harmonic frequencies on a fixed cycle. Every 47 seconds, there was a brief window, less than 2 seconds long, where the shields were vulnerable to a specific counter-frequency. No one had ever noticed this, because no one had ever gotten close enough to study the shields in detail during active operation. Trejo designed a targeting algorithm that could exploit this window. She tested it in simulation over 100 times. It worked every single time. She sent her findings to Admiral Payne through an encrypted channel, and received a one-word reply: good. Back on Nexus Prime, the Council was growing uneasy. Species that had always sided with the Korvathi began asking quiet questions. Where were the humans? What were they doing? Why had they gone so quiet? Ambassador Whitmore returned to the Council chamber just once during the 3 weeks of silence. He walked in alone, without aides or guards. The chamber fell silent as he approached the podium. He did not speak. He simply activated the display screen behind him and projected a single image. It was a child's shoe, small and worn, half buried in gray ash. It had been recovered from the ruins of Haven's Reach by a search and rescue team. Whitmore let the image stay on the screen for 60 seconds. No one in the chamber moved. No one spoke. Then he turned off the screen, stepped away from the podium, and walked out. Dreth Vanos stood up and demanded that the Council condemn humanity's threatening and irrational behavior. A vote was called. The Korvathi and Phalori voted in favor. The Seldrathi voted in favor. But 12 other species abstained, including 3 that had never before refused to side with the Korvathi. The motion failed. Viano was furious. He pounded his fists on the table and accused the abstaining species of cowardice. But the truth was simpler than cowardice. The smaller species had watched the footage from Haven's Reach. They had seen what the Seldrathi did to a defenseless colony. And now they were watching the humans go silent, and they understood, perhaps better than the Korvathi did, what that silence meant. On the Unbroken Resolve, Admiral Payne received the final intelligence package from Captain Brennan. She spread the data across her holographic display and studied it for an hour. Every Seldrathi ship, every base, every supply line was marked and catalogued. She knew where they were. She knew how they would react. She knew what they would try to do when the first shots were fired. Commander Hadley stood beside her, looking at the same display. "They have no idea what's coming, do they?" he said. Payne shook her head slowly. "They think we're grieving," she said. "They think grief makes you weak." She touched the display, zooming in on the Seldrathi home fleet. "They've never seen what happens when humans stop grieving and start deciding." She turned to face the bridge crew. Every officer was at their station. Every screen was lit. The fleet was ready. 200 warships and 60,000 men and women waiting in the dark of the nebula like a fist about to close. "Send the order," Payne said. "All groups advance. We begin at dawn." There was no dawn in space, of course, but every human in the fleet knew what she meant. The waiting was over. The silence was about to break, and when it did, the galaxy would hear it. The attack did not begin with fire. It began with darkness. At exactly the same moment, across 3 star systems, Lieutenant Megan Holt activated the curtain. The signal disruptors that Captain Brennan's team had secretly planted over the past 3 weeks came alive all at once, and the Seldrathi military communication network collapsed like a house built on sand. Fleet commanders lost contact with their ships. Ships lost contact with each other. Distress channels went dead. Order channels went dead. Even the personal communicators that officers carried in their pockets stopped working. In the space of 30 seconds, the entire Seldrathi war machine was blind, deaf, and unable to speak. Korat Sel was on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Wrath, when the communications died. He was a tall Seldrathi with dark green scales and a row of ceremonial scars across his jaw that marked him as a veteran of 6 campaigns. He had been eating his evening meal when the screens went black. "What happened?" he said, standing up so fast that his plate fell to the floor. His communications officer turned to him with wide, frightened eyes. "Everything is down, Commander. All channels, all frequencies. We cannot reach anyone." Zell opened his mouth to give an order, but before he could speak, the first human warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and the sky outside his viewport filled with light. Admiral Payne had divided her fleet into 3 groups, each with a specific target and a specific job. There would be no confusion, no improvisation, no wasted effort. Every captain knew exactly what to do, and exactly when to do it. The first battle group struck the Seldrathi shipyards at Verak Minor. These were the massive orbital facilities where the Dominion built its warships, dozens of construction platforms and dry docks arranged around a small moon. The shipyards were defended by a garrison fleet of 40 ships, but without communications, the garrison could not coordinate. Human cruisers hit them from 3 angles at once, and Dr. Trejo's shield-cracking algorithm tore through their defenses like a knife through cloth. Every 47 seconds, during that tiny window when the Seldrathi shields flickered, human weapons found their mark. The garrison fleet broke apart in under an hour. The shipyards were reduced to twisted metal and floating debris. The Seldrathi's ability to build new warships was gone. The second battle group engaged the Seldrathi home fleet near their capital world. This was the largest and most dangerous part of the operation. The home fleet numbered over 100 ships, and even without communications, they were dangerous. But Payne had planned for this. Her second group did not try to destroy the home fleet. Its job was to keep them busy, to pin them in place so they could not fly to the aid of other targets. Human ships darted in, fired, and pulled back, always staying just out of reach, always threatening but never committing to a full engagement. The Seldrathi home fleet chased shadows and fired at ghosts, while the real damage was done elsewhere. The third battle group, led by Commander Kyle Hadley from the bridge of the heavy cruiser Iron Compass, hit Kyrath Station. This was the target that mattered most to every human in the fleet. Kyrath Station was the military command hub from which the attack on Haven's Reach had been planned and launched. The orders that killed 12,000 people had been sent from this station. Hadley was a calm man by nature, but as his ships closed in on Kyrath Station, he felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. He thought about the footage he had watched, the burning town, the collapsing school, the people running with nowhere to go. He thought about Paula Grant's children, whose names he had memorized without meaning to. He thought about the shoe in the ash. "All ships," he said into the fleet channel, his voice steady and flat. "Engage." The battle for Kyrath Station lasted 2 hours. The station's defenders fought hard, but they were fighting alone, without reinforcements, without orders from high command, without any idea what was happening in the rest of the war. Hadley's ships hit them with everything they had, and one by one, the defensive platforms went dark. When the station's shields finally collapsed, Hadley did not order it destroyed. He ordered it boarded. Marines in heavy combat armor breached the station through 6 entry points, and moved through the corridors with speed and precision. They secured the command center in 40 minutes. While all this was happening, something remarkable was taking place that would later define how the galaxy remembered this war. At every engagement, across every battle, human ships actively protected Seldrathi civilians. When the shipyards at Verak Minor were attacked, There were over 3,000 Seldrathi civilian workers on the construction platforms. Human ships broadcast evacuation warnings on emergency frequencies, even though they knew the Seldrathi military channels were jammed. They opened safe corridors and held fire on entire sections of the battlefield until civilian transports had cleared the area. 2 human frigates took damage because they refused to fire on a Seldrathi warship that was using a civilian transport as a shield, choosing instead to maneuver around it. Near the Seldrathi capital, when a convoy of refugee ships stumbled into the battle zone, the second battle group ceased fire for 11 minutes to let them pass. 11 minutes in the middle of a fight where every second counted. Admiral Payne authorized the pause without hesitation. At Kyrath Station, when the Marines discovered that a section of the station housed families of military officers, they sealed that section off, posted guards for protection, and brought in medical supplies. A Seldrathi woman with 2 small children was found hiding in a storage room. A Marine named Eddie Cortez, a 24-year-old kid from a small town in Texas, knelt down, offered the children water, and told the mother in broken Seldrathi that she was safe. This was not soft-heartedness. This was the order that Admiral Payne had given to every ship, every Marine, and every officer before the operation began. "We hit their military with everything we have," she had said, "but we do not touch their people. We do not burn their cities. We do not kill their children. We are not them. And when this is over, I want the whole galaxy to know the difference." Korath Zell tried to fight back. When his communications were restored through a backup system his engineers managed to rig, he rallied a group of 12 ships and attempted a counterattack against Hadley's force near Kyrath Station. But Captain Brennan, still operating behind enemy lines, detected the movement and relayed it to Admiral Payne. Payne had anticipated exactly this response. She had left a trap, a cluster of heavy cruisers hiding behind a nearby moon, powered down and invisible to sensors. Zell's counterattack flew straight into the trap. His 12 ships were surrounded in minutes. Payne hailed him on an open channel and offered him a single chance to surrender. Zell refused. His flagship was hit by concentrated fire that disabled its engines, weapons, and shields without destroying it. Marines boarded the Dominion's Wrath and found Zell on his bridge, standing with his arms crossed, his face showing nothing. He was taken alive, not as a trophy, not for revenge, but because Chancellor Beckett wanted him to stand before the Galactic Council and explain what he had done and why. 72 hours after the first disruptor activated, it was over. The Seldrathi military was broken. Their shipyards were destroyed. Their command infrastructure was captured. Their fleet was scattered and leaderless. It was the fastest and most complete military campaign the galaxy had ever seen, and it had been executed with a precision that left military analysts from dozens of species struggling to understand how it was possible. The Korvathi and Falori, who had quietly supported the Seldrathi and encouraged the attack on Haven's Reach, began sending frantic messages to their own fleets, ordering them to stand down and pull back from any positions near human space. Dreth Vano locked himself in his quarters on Nexus Prime and refused to speak to anyone. On the bridge of the Unbroken Resolve, Admiral Payne stood looking at the tactical display. Every objective was marked as complete. She had not slept in 3 days. Commander Hadley's voice came through the comm channel. "Admiral, Kyrath Station is secure. Zell is in custody. Civilian sections are intact and protected. 0 civilian casualties confirmed across all 3 theaters." Payne closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she said, "Well done, Commander. All ships, stand down from combat operations. Maintain defensive positions. The fighting is over." She paused, then added, "But the hard part is just beginning." The emergency session of the Galactic Council was called on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning, the chamber on Nexus Prime was more crowded than it had been in living memory. Every species with a seat had sent representatives. Species that usually sent one ambassador sent 5. Observation galleries that had been empty for decades were packed with diplomats, journalists, and military attachés who had traveled from across the galaxy to witness what was about to happen. The air in the chamber carried a tension that was almost physical. For the first time in the Council's long history, a junior species had not only fought back against one of the great powers, but had won so completely and so quickly that the old assumptions about who was strong and who was weak no longer held. Chancellor Nora Beckett arrived at Nexus Prime aboard a diplomatic transport with a small escort of 4 warships. She did not bring a fleet. She did not bring an army. She brought Ambassador Craig Whitmore, a small team of legal advisors, and a data case containing every piece of evidence collected before, during, and after the attack on Haven's Reach. She stepped into the council chamber wearing a simple dark suit with the seal of the Terran Federation on her collar. No medals, no military decorations. She walked to the central podium with the same steady pace she used when walking into her own office, as if this were just another day. The chamber fell silent before she reached the podium. She did not ask for silence. She did not need to. Beckett placed her hands on the podium and looked out at the assembled representatives. Hundreds of faces from dozens of species looked back at her. Some with fear, some with respect, some with something that might have been shame. "I will begin," she said, her voice clear and even, "with the names." She activated a display behind her, and a list began to scroll. Names. 12,116 of them. Every person who had died on Haven's Reach. She read them aloud, not quickly, not with dramatic pauses or theatrical emotion. She simply read each name as if it mattered, because it did. Paula Grant, her 2 children, Leo Grant, age 9, and Sophie Grant, age 7, the school teacher who had been with them, the doctor who had been on her way to the clinic, the old man who had been sitting on his porch, the young couple who had just moved to the colony 2 months earlier. It took over an hour. No one in the chamber moved. No one spoke. No one dared interrupt. Somewhere in the Korvathi section, a junior diplomat began to cry, quietly, and no one told him to stop. When the last name was read, Beckett paused for a long moment. Then she moved on. "The evidence," she said. She presented everything. Danny Marsh's footage, unedited and complete. Sensor logs from the colony's automated weather stations, which had recorded the entire attack. Intercepted Seldrathi military communications, proving that the bombardment of Haven's Reach was planned weeks in advance, and approved at the highest levels of the Dominion's command structure. Intelligence showing that the Korvathi had been informed of the planned attack, and had chosen to do nothing. Financial records showing that the Phalori Compact had provided fuel and logistical support to the Seldrathi fleet before the operation. She offered all of it, every file, every recording, every encrypted message, to any council species that wished to conduct its own independent analysis. "We are not asking you to take our word for it," she said. "We are asking you to look at the truth for yourselves." Dreth Vano stood up. His dark blue face was tight with anger, and his forearms were clenched at his sides. "This evidence is fabricated," he said loudly. "The humans are manipulating this council with false records and emotional theater. I demand that this session be adjourned until a proper investigation can be conducted by neutral parties." Beckett looked at him calmly. "I have just offered the raw data to every species in this chamber. If it is fabricated, that will be easy to prove. Shall we wait while your own analysts examine it?" Vano said nothing. He sat down. Then they brought in Korath Zel. The Seldrathi fleet commander was escorted into the chamber by 2 human marines who walked beside him without touching him. He was not in chains. He was not injured. He wore a clean uniform, and he had been given food and medical attention during his detention. He walked with his back straight and his head high, and he looked at the assembled council with undisguised contempt. Beckett stepped aside and let Ambassador Whitmore conduct the questioning. Whitmore, who had spent years being mocked and dismissed in this very chamber, stood before Zell with a quiet authority that surprised even those who knew him. "Commander Zell," Whitmore said, "did you order the attack on the human colony of Haven's Reach?" "I did," Zell said. His voice was flat and unapologetic. "Were you aware that Haven's Reach was a civilian agricultural colony with no military installations or defenses?" "I was." "Were you aware that the population consisted primarily of farmers and their families, including over 3,000 children?" Zell's jaw tightened. "I was aware of the colony's composition. It was chosen because it was undefended. The purpose of the attack was to send a message." "What message?" Whitmore asked. "That humans should accept their place in the galactic order," Zell said. "That expanding into territory near Seldrathi space would not be tolerated. That weakness invites consequences." The chamber was absolutely still. Whitmore let the words hang in the air for a long moment. "Do you regret the deaths of 12,000 civilians, including 3,000 children?" he asked. Zell looked at him with cold eyes. "Humans should not settle worlds they cannot defend." Several gasps echoed through the chamber. A Fenari ambassador put her hand over her mouth. Even some of the Korvathi delegates looked away. Whitmore nodded slowly. "Thank you, Commander. I have no further questions." Zell was escorted out. The chamber remained silent. Then Chancellor Beckett returned to the podium. She did not talk about the military campaign. She did not boast about the speed of the victory or the power of the Terran fleet. Instead, she spoke simply and directly. "When the Seldrathi destroyed Haven's Reach, they killed 12,000 of our people, most of them civilians who had never held a weapon. They burned our town. They destroyed our school. They killed our children." She paused. "When we responded, we struck their shipyards, their military bases, and their warships. We did not touch their cities. We did not harm their families. We opened safe corridors for their civilian transports. Our Marines brought water and medical supplies to Seldrathi families trapped on a captured station. We took their fleet commander alive and treated him with dignity." She looked around the chamber slowly. "We ask this council to consider what it means that we had to show your civilization the difference between strength and cruelty. We ask you to think about what kind of galaxy you want to live in. One where the strong destroy the weak because they can, or one where power carries responsibility." She stopped. The silence lasted for nearly a minute. Then the votes began. The Seldrathi Dominion was stripped of its council seat by a margin of 47-3. The Korvathi lost 3 of their 5 seats on the Inner Circle by a margin of 41-9. The Phalori Compact was formally censured by unanimous vote. And then, in a vote that Ambassador Whitmore had not dared to hope for, the United Terran Federation was granted a permanent seat on the Inner Circle by a margin of 39-11. When the result was announced, Whitmore stood very still. His eyes were wet, but he did not wipe them. He simply nodded once and sat down. As delegates filed out of the chamber, many of them approached Chancellor Beckett. Some offered formal condolences, some offered alliance proposals. A few simply shook her hand without saying anything. One ambassador, from the Velthari, a small insectoid species that had been pushed around by the Korvathi for over a century, stopped in front of Beckett and said in halting human speech that he had clearly practiced, "Thank you for showing us it was possible to stand up." Beckett took his hand gently and held it. "It was always possible," she said. "Sometimes someone just has to go first." That night, alone in her quarters on Nexus Prime, Beckett sat by the window and looked out at the stars. She thought about the names she had read. She thought about Paula Grant's children. She thought about the shoe in the ash and the sound of her own voice, reading name after name to a room full of beings who had never cared about humanity until humanity forced them to listen. She did not feel victorious. She felt tired and sad and very, very old. But she also felt something else, something small and stubborn and warm. She felt the beginning of something new. 1 year had passed since the war, and the galaxy was a different place. Not a better place, not yet, but a different one. The old order that had stood for centuries, where the Korvathi dictated and everyone else obeyed, had cracked down the middle, and what was growing in the gaps was something new and uncertain and full of possibility. The Seldrathi Dominion was in pieces. Without their fleet, without their shipyards, and without their seat on the council, the old military government had collapsed within months. The generals and admirals who had ruled with an iron fist were gone. Some arrested by their own people, some fled to the outer territories, some simply disappeared. In their place, a new civilian government was struggling to hold things together. It was messy and loud and full of arguments, and it was the first time in Seldrathi history that ordinary people had any say in how their world was run. The Korvathi were still powerful, but their power had changed shape. Drethvano had been removed as High Speaker by his own party, replaced by a younger Korvathi named Saren Kal, who had a reputation for being practical rather than proud. In a private meeting with Ambassador Whitmore that was later leaked to the press, Kal admitted that underestimating humanity had been the worst strategic mistake in Korvathi history. "We measured them by their size and their age," Kal said. "We should have measured them by what they were willing to do." Across the galaxy, smaller species that had spent generations under the shadow of the great powers began to stir. The Velthari, the Fenari, the Dorothi, a dozen others, all of them sent delegations to Earth asking about mutual defense agreements. They did not want to be conquered or controlled. They wanted what humanity had shown was possible, the ability to stand on their own and know that someone would stand with them. Chancellor Beckett handled the requests carefully. She did not want humanity to become the new Korvathi, gathering allies like weapons and building an empire under a different name. "We are not looking for subjects," she told her cabinet. "We are looking for partners. There is a difference, and we must never forget it." The Terran Federation changed too. The military, which had always existed quietly in the background of human society, was now visible and respected in ways it had never been before. Commander Kyle Hadley had been promoted to Rear Admiral and was given command of the newly established Frontier Defense Initiative, a network of early warning stations and rapid response fleets designed to ensure that no human colony would ever be caught defenseless again. "We were lucky," Hadley said at the initiative's founding ceremony. "Danny Marsh got out. He carried the truth far enough for it to matter. But luck is not a strategy. We need to make sure that next time, if there is a next time, we see it coming." Lieutenant Megan Holt, the woman who had built the curtain and blinded an entire enemy fleet, was promoted and placed in charge of the Federation's new intelligence division. She recruited analysts and engineers from across human space and built a network of sensors and listening posts that stretched from the core worlds to the farthest colonies. She was not interested in spying on allies or gathering political secrets. She wanted one thing: to make sure that no fleet from any species could ever approach a human world without being detected. Captain Scott Brennan continued his work in deep space, though now with official recognition and a significantly larger budget. His stealth frigates ranged far beyond human territory, mapping and monitoring and reporting back. He was rarely home, and he preferred it that way. When asked by a journalist what he did for a living, he smiled and said, "I go to places where people don't expect visitors." Dr. Alice Trejo returned to her university lab and published a paper on Seldrathi shield harmonics that won her 3 scientific awards and made her the most famous physicist in human space. She donated the prize money to the Havens Reach Memorial Fund and refused all interview requests. "The work speaks for itself," she told her colleagues. "I do not need to speak for it." Korath Gel remained in Terran custody. He was held in a clean, well-lit facility on a moon orbiting Mars. He had a private room, access to a library, 3 meals a day, and a window that looked out at the stars. He was not mistreated. He was not tortured. He was not humiliated. When a Seldrathi journalist was allowed to visit him and asked how he was being treated, Zell was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "They are treating me better than I deserve, and that is the worst punishment they could have chosen." It was the closest thing to remorse anyone ever heard from him. Chancellor Beckett had ordered his humane treatment personally. When her advisors questioned the decision, arguing that Zell deserved to suffer for what he had done, Beckett shook her head. "If we treat him the way he treated our people, then we become what he is. And the whole point of this, the whole reason we fought the way we fought, was to prove that we are not what he is. We do not get to abandon that principle because it is inconvenient." Admiral Lena Payne retired 6 months after the war. There was no grand ceremony, no parade, no statues. She requested a quiet gathering on the unbroken resolve with the officers she had served with, and that was what she got. They ate dinner in the ship's mess hall, and Payne drank 2 glasses of wine, more than anyone had ever seen her drink. At the end of the evening, Rear Admiral Hadley walked her to the shuttle bay. He stopped at the door and asked her the question that had been on his mind for months. "Admiral, what do you want to be remembered for?" Payne thought about it. She looked at the shuttle that would take her home, and then she looked back at Hadley. "I want to be remembered as the woman who hit back hard enough that we never had to do it again." Then she shook his hand, stepped onto the shuttle, and was gone. The memorial on Haven's Reach was dedicated on the 1st anniversary of the attack. The colony had been rebuilt. New buildings stood where the old ones had fallen. Fields that had been scorched black were green again. A new school had been constructed on the same spot where the old one had stood, and it was full of children, some of them from the original families who had chosen to come back. Danny Marsh came back for the dedication. He had spent the past year being called a hero, which made him deeply uncomfortable. He was still skinny, still had grease under his fingernails, and still flew the same battered freighter, though it had been repaired and upgraded so many times that hardly any of the original ship remained. He walked through the rebuilt town slowly, looking at the new buildings and the new faces. He stopped at the edge of the landing strip, where he had launched his freighter a year ago, his hands shaking, his ship falling apart around him, the sky full of fire above him. A small plaque had been placed in the ground there. It read, "From this place, one man carried the truth far enough for it to matter." Danny stared at it for a long time. Then he knelt down, touched the plaque with his fingertips, and whispered, "I just flew the ship. The truth carried itself." Chancellor Beckett gave the dedication speech to a crowd of several thousand people, with millions more watching across human space and billions across the galaxy. She kept it short. She talked about loss and rebuilding and the stubborn human habit of planting seeds in burned ground. She talked about the names she had read in the council chamber, and she said that she still heard them in her sleep, and that she hoped she always would. Then she said something that would be quoted for generations. "They asked me if the galaxy finally respects us. I have thought about that question for a long time, and I think the answer is this. Respect is earned in different ways. We earned it by showing that we could be terrible when we needed to be, and chose to be decent when we did not have to be. That is the hardest thing any civilization can do, and I think in the end, the galaxy knows it." After the speech, The crowd dispersed slowly. Families walked through the memorial garden where the names of the lost were carved into walls of smooth black stone. Children ran between the rows, too young to understand what the names meant, and their laughter mixed with the sound of the wind in a way that felt like both an ending and a beginning. Beckett stayed after everyone else had left. She walked alone through the garden, reading the names one more time. She stopped at Paula Grant's name and at the names of Leo and Sophie carved beside it. She stood there for a long time, saying nothing, until the sun dipped below the hills and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above her. Somewhere up there, visible as faint points of light, the ships of the Terran fleet held a silent formation in orbit. They were there because humanity had learned, at terrible cost, that the galaxy did not reward kindness with kindness. It rewarded strength. But the way you used that strength, the choices you made when you held all the power and no one could stop you, that was what defined you. Humanity had made its choice. The galaxy had seen it. And nothing would ever be quite the same again. Nora Beckett looked up at the stars one last time. Then she turned and walked back toward the lights of the town, where people were gathering for dinner, and children were being called inside, and life, stubborn and ordinary and precious, was going on. The year was 2387, and humanity had been a member of the Galactic Council for 43 years. In all that time, no one had taken them seriously. The elder species looked at humans the way a grown man looks at a child sitting at the dinner table. Tolerated, but never respected. The Korvathi, the Seldrothi, the Phalori, these were the species that ruled the galaxy. Humanity was just noise in the background. Ambassador Craig Whitmore had spent 11 years on Nexus Prime, the massive orbital station where the council held its sessions. He was a tall man with tired eyes and a suit that always looked slightly wrinkled, not because he was careless, but because he never had time to rest. Every day was the same. He would stand before the chamber, deliver reports, propose trade agreements, and request fair treatment for human colonies. And every day, the elder species would ignore him, or worse, laugh. On this particular morning, Whitmore stood at the central podium and presented an economic proposal for shared resource development along the outer rim. He spoke clearly and carefully. He had practiced the speech twice the night before. He was halfway through his second point when Dreth Vano, the Korvathi High Speaker, raised one of his forearms and interrupted him. "Why do we continue to waste time on this?" Vano said, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. His skin was a dark blue, and his eyes were like polished black stones. The humans have contributed nothing of value to this council. Perhaps it is time we reconsidered whether they deserve a seat here at all. Laughter rippled through the Korvathi section. A few Phalori delegates joined in. Whitmore stood still at the podium, his jaw tight, and waited for the noise to stop. He finished his proposal to a mostly empty room. That evening, he sat alone in his quarters and stared out at the stars. He thought about calling Chancellor Beckett back on Earth, but decided against it. What would he say? They laughed at us again? She already knew. Everyone knew. 12,000 light-years away, on a small colony world called Haven's Reach, life was simple and good. The planet had green hills, wide rivers, and soil that grew almost anything. About 12,000 people lived there, mostly farmers and their families. There was one school, 2 medical clinics, and a landing strip for cargo ships. It was the kind of place where people knew each other's names and left their doors unlocked at night. A woman named Paula Grant ran the colony's supply office. She was 36 years old, had 2 children, and had moved to Haven's Reach 5 years earlier because she wanted a quiet life away from the crowded cities of Earth. On the morning everything changed, she was standing outside her office, drinking coffee, and watching her kids walk to school. The sky was clear and blue. The air smelled like fresh grass. Then the sky turned red. The Seldrathi battle fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel without warning. 14 warships, each one larger than anything the colony had ever seen, formed a line above the horizon. There was no communication, no demand for surrender, no warning of any kind. The bombardment began immediately. The first strikes hit the landing strip and the communication tower. The second wave hit the town center. Buildings that had stood for years came apart like paper. The ground shook so hard that people fell where they stood. Fire spread across the grain fields in minutes. The school where Paula's children had been walking toward collapsed in on itself before anyone could reach it. She ran toward the school, screaming their names, but the heat pushed her back. The air was full of smoke and dust and the sound of things breaking apart. Around her, people were running in every direction, but there was nowhere to go. The ships above kept firing, methodical and patient, like they were cleaning a stain off a table. In the chaos, a cargo pilot named Danny Marsh was loading supply crates into his old freighter at the edge of town. He was 28, skinny, with grease-stained hands, and a ship that barely passed inspection on its best day. When the first explosions hit, he dropped flat on the ground and covered his head. When he looked up, half the town was gone. Danny did not think of himself as brave. He would have said he was just a guy who moved boxes from one planet to another. But something in him decided, in that moment, that someone had to get out. He scrambled into his freighter, fired up the engines, and launched straight into the smoke. The Seldrathi had jammed all communications, but they had not expected anyone to actually try to fly through their blockade. Danny's freighter was small and slow, but it was also insignificant. The warships were focused on the ground. He slipped between two cruisers, took a hit that ripped open his cargo hold, and jumped to faster-than-light speed, with half his ship venting atmosphere. He reached the nearest relay station, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, and transmitted everything his ship's cameras had recorded. The footage reached Earth 6 hours later. Chancellor Nora Beckett watched it in her office, alone. She was a woman in her mid-50s, with short gray hair and steady hands. She had led the Terran Federation through trade disputes, border conflicts, and political crises without ever raising her voice. People said nothing could rattle her. She watched the footage from beginning to end. She watched the town burn. She watched people running. She watched the school collapse. When it was over, she sat in silence for a long time. Her advisors came in and started talking about diplomatic responses, formal protests, emergency council sessions. Beckett let them talk. She did not interrupt. Then she stood up, turned off the screen, and said quietly, "Get me Admiral Payne." The room went still. Everyone knew what that name meant. Admiral Lena Payne commanded the Deep Fleet, the part of the Terran military that most people pretended did not exist. That same night, the Galactic Council received a single message from the Terran Federation. It was short and contained no emotion. It read, "Humanity acknowledges the unprovoked destruction of Haven's Reach. We will respond in our own time and in our own way. This communication requires no reply." Dreth Vano read the message aloud in the council chamber and laughed. "They acknowledge it," he said, his tone mocking. "How very human. They acknowledge their own weakness." A few delegates laughed with him, but most did not. A Fenari ambassador in the back row, a member of a small species that had dealt with humans for decades, leaned over to her aide and whispered, "He should not have laughed. He should be very, very afraid." No one on the council slept well that night. Something was coming. They could feel it the way animals feel a storm before the first drop of rain. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, the engines of human warships were already warming up.